All right. Hi, guys. It's Pill Eater, and this is the Spinning Top Club. I am not doing an extra edition of the White Nationalist Manifesto audiobook reading. I am just taking a break on it, just reading some other things and doing some other things. But I have on with me is a Patrick Destroyale, who's on mute right now. I don't know if he can hear me right now.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Great. Hi, Patrick. What's up?
Hey, how's it going? How's it going?
Nothing much. Tonight we were supposed to have a Lost Your Asian show, but I guess Shark he's busy with something. So I was busy last time because I was with my girlfriend watching a prep game and whatnot, and I've been busy with other things like work and such not. So I've been using this channel as my backup live stream, and I've been reading the White Nationalist Manifesto. I haven't gotten to the next chapter because not because I'm lazy, because I'm doing other work and I'm reading Dungeons and Dragons. So I'm going on a spree on that. So expect actually on the Pill Eater channel to upload more Dungeons and Dragons videos. But well, how's everything been going?
I think it's been going pretty good here. Yeah, I don't know much about the White Nationalist Manifesto. I'm not really into that stuff too much or at all, but it does sound like it might be an interesting read, though.
It's just Greg Johnson making his arguments for white nationalism to like normative people. But I've already find some criticism within the book is because he just jumps into the Jewish question without warning and assumes that, it's definitely transgressive, what I'm saying is. And if you're a normal reader, the book definitely has novelty that if you're into like Feral House, like Adam Parfrey's books, and you're just reading books for shock art, the White Nationalist Manifesto unfortunately falls into that tradition where Greg Johnson claims, oh no, this is a book that's going to start a lot of arguments and a lot of rational discourse. And it's like, it seems to me it's not a Steven Pinkerton book. It's more like well, it tries to be, and it is. It's good arguments, but I just feel like it's the novelty that it's the White Nationalist Manifesto for all its reasons to sell more copies.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not really into politics at the moment. I don't like have a political stance, but as far as like white nationalists go, the Greg Johnson, he does seem a little bit more eloquent than some of the others. And I'm not trying to put anybody down or say that like eloquence is like good or bad or anything, but he does seem somewhat. He does seem able to express himself pretty well. But what I did want to do is I wanted to present information that may actually prove that Asians are an alpha ethnicity. Because I have been hearing people like try to make the claim that Asians are beta or better, however it's pronounced. But I think Asians are probably alpha more likely than anything if you had to put them in one camp or the other.
I mean, yeah, I was totally like to hear that. Like, I mean, that would be something I would put on the Lost Your Asians, but I'd like to hear that because that's very interesting because like, I've been saying pretty much the same thing too, where, especially on some places, you have the cliche of the Asian guy who's, if you want to use recent manosphere terms, beta or something. And you have this image that he's a nerd who plays StarCraft. Well, again, if you talk about Yukio Mishima or some of the Japanese writers that kind of commit somewhat or committed to die when they lose more often, suicidal and taking and having dominance. I could definitely see that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, yeah, it's like, I'm not really looking at this from a perspective of like a warrior or anything like that. But although I think one could look at it from that perspective, I'm just looking at it in terms of like if you look at like China, for instance, China is one of the few countries right now that are resisting American cultural hegemony over the American global cultural hegemony. China is one of the few countries currently resisting it. We don't know for how long they will, or if they will be successful in that or not. And then they have a dictator, at least for now, Xi Jinping. Sometimes they refer to him as like Big Daddy Xi in China. And I don't know. I mean, that guy seems pretty alpha to me if he's a dictator. And so, I mean, if they have like a dictator, and if they're like just like not going along with like what America like wants everybody to do, I mean, I don't know. I mean, that seems pretty alpha to me because like I don't know, like you look at these people in the like in the Western Europe, they seem pretty submitted to American cultural dominance. Many African nations seem submitted to cultural dominance. And so these people get into this like alpha beta thing. They try to like make it out like, yeah, it's like the whites and the blacks who are like the true alphas, and the Asians are just betas or whatever. But if you just like look at like global geopolitics, Asians are pretty much going their own way, to quote the whole MGTOW phraseology. I mean, they're, at least for now, I mean, who knows if they'll be able to resist this stuff for much longer, but the fact they've resisted it at least this long does show you something, you know?
Before when I'm thinking, because I'm bound to write another book on some of, the future Eurasianism happening. And it just surprised me whenever I want to break, like I want to read like Dungeons and Dragons or just like read my own literature for a bit and do my own arts. Like I always go on Twitter and like I open up Twitter and all my feed is like typical nerd culture feed or whatnot, and it's all just like whites acting like Asians, especially some of the white girls now who realize that these are typical Twitch girls I follow, and they no longer believe in this standard of beauty, which is white German girl who serves beer with the typical as Andy Nowicki puts it, the Aryan girl in the wheat field. The image now, like some blonde-haired girls who play Twitch are just like they think they're basically anime girls. They especially put like eyeliner in their eyes to make them look more anime more than ever. And if you ask any of these white girls like the standard of beauty, they would say it's probably racist to ever assume they're Japanese, but they'll definitely say, "Oh, I'm definitely influenced from Japanese interest." And I've always had this interest of getting some of these models on my program and just interviewing them, like ditzy girls and doxies who are like, whether that be through porn or I don't know about porn Twitch thing, but it just shows that our sexuality is being changed by the Japanese aesthetic. And that shows you something that must be led by a Japanese patriarch in some way, if you want to put it in like William Gibson Neuromancer term or something like that.
Well, there's some wit to the Japanese aesthetic. It's there's something physical about it, but it's intertwined with wit, and I think that part of the reason for that is like I think that one of the major differences between European and East Asian culture is derived from the fact that for centuries in Europe they were putting like a lot of their smart people into like monasteries to like never reproduce or something like that. And whereas I mean they obviously had Buddhist monasteries and stuff like that in East Asia, but the level of encouragement of non-reproduction among their like intellectual classes never really made it to the same level that was the case in Europe. And so I would say that any sort of notion that East Asians are like better or whatever, beta, is really derived from anti-intellectualism that you can really trace back to people just putting all their smart people into like convents to not reproduce. Like I don't really see a major difference between doing that and like the sterilization policies that people are doing in like the early 1900s to people who are considered quote unquote mentally defective, except they're just put into like monasteries. And I mean, not everybody has to reproduce, I'm not saying that, but you don't want like an entire social class encouraged not to reproduce. Maybe it's okay if like one or two in a social class like that doesn't reproduce, but and so I think that like a lot of this perceptions of East Asia really reflect a hostility towards their own intelligentsia among Europeans, but as intellectualism gets more and more respected, I think but there's more to East Asian culture than intellectualism, of course, because you got like a huge tradition of physical culture too, which is very important. So
Yeah, I mean, I just think there's a boiling point or a threshold where other whites, I think the millennial generation, especially Gen X, they're kind of in denial with everything's going on. I've always hear like really grim and dark kind of writing right now about how millennials are self-centered. They're stuck on their phone. They're the first transhumanist, Nicklandian accelerationist generation that's going to go full-fledged into doom. However, I have hope where maybe, just maybe, they'll resist this and create their own form of human biodiversity, right? This anti-liberal paradigm. But at the same time, I feel like the most cowardly and more bourgeois middle-class whites that feed into their computers and want Asian girlfriends, what's going to happen is that they're going to live a lying life. They're not going to be honest. And really what I would like to see happen is that we would see an entire movement of these whites who are part of this, hooked into the system of anime and video games, and then just pretty much just open their mind and become honest and just no longer say they're not lying and playing the old boomer egalitarian race game, and rather just be honest and say, I want to have a Eurasianist futurism or some kind of bizarre, you know what I'm saying. It's just that there's just so much art today and within nerd culture or whatnot that has pretty much it's not in touch with reality. And most whites, when bringing up, they want to lie about life. They want to say it's not there, and yet there's so much evidence it's there. Almost like maybe probably the reason why Alex Jones is really popular right now, because Alex Jones makes all these conspiratorial claims and yet people believe him because he's almost this new age philosophy that gets to people about finding, InfoWars and truth.
I like Alex Jones. I like him better. I think he's a better leader for conservatives than like a Greg Johnson. I mean, I'm not insulting Greg Johnson, but I just think Alex Jones would be a better leader for conservatives than Greg Johnson.
A month back, my older brother, he was watching this one Alex Jones video, and it was on Joe Rogan, and I loved it so much that I loved it so much that I made a transcript of this speech he did on the Joe Rogan Experience on February 1st, 2017, and it was a speech about transhumanism, and my brother really liked it, and I kind of decoded it and I wrote it on my blog, the Alex Jones speech about transhumanism. And there's another science fiction book my brother really loves called The Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe, and a lot of it that has to do with accelerationism and this kind of alien future and whatnot. And it's almost like Alex Jones was saying like everything, the problem with today's society, but in this like new age, somewhat Alan Watts science fiction tone. And the typical boomer will scream at it. Like the boomer will be like, "Ew, what is this? It doesn't make any sense." And Nazism, but it's like, no, if you're really smart and understand and put the pieces together, what sounds like, oh, this guy must be high, actually turns out to be quite true. And that's something I really like about Jones, is that you have to understand that these big things like Pizzagate, or whether it's that Jesus is an alien, or that we're just going to be uploaded into like an artificial AI, is pretty much concerning things about our society in a science fiction way. It doesn't seem real right now, but we're connected to our phones, right?
I think this, like, with where things are going with technology, things could go in a way that isn't good. And I am not familiar with what precisely you're talking about, Alex Jones, as having said, but I get the impression he might have been freaking out about transhumanism and people being like hooked up in like to machines similar to like the Matrix or something like that. I think that is a fear that's warranted, and that's something that society does have to worry about. However, I also think that we do live in a technological society with a technological future, and we can navigate these things without overdoing it and actually like getting our brains hooked up to like microchips, getting our brains hooked up to computers and stuff like that. I think we can avoid that potential pitfall, and I don't even think it's a potential pitfall, but I think we can avoid that. I think we are And so, but yeah, Alex Jones right up. But see, like this is the thing. Like, I mean, you brought up science fiction, and instead of people like worrying about like society going to hell and all like sorts of weird racial stuff and things like that, I think that people would be better off just like investing their energy into like what they can create. So like focus on like writing science fiction novels and talking about the concepts in the novels, and then um, and then with those, and then attracting human consciousness and attention to those concepts, so that those sorts of things are given life, and so just create new things. Instead, people are giving all their attention and giving life to a lot of this like doom and gloom, apocalyptic type things like race war, racial struggle, and stuff. But this is all like this is sort of like old fashioned type things. I mean, I'm definitely like very traditional in a lot of the ways I think about things, and I respect tradition. But all this stuff about like an extreme like level of race war, I think is a little bit too old fashioned in terms of what should be manifested in the future.
Like old fashioned is in talking just about race or something like that, or talking just about like this race realism or this.
It's just boring.
Mm.
It's just boring. I mean, like it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't produce anything. It's not based on an idea. Like, for instance, if you look at like civic nationalism, and let's get this out of the way first. I'm not like against like race realism or people talking about race or discussing like the nuances of things. But if you look at like civic nationalism, it rallies people around like a set of like words and documents, like a living culture. You know, people, something that people can actually sink their teeth into. Whereas with this like race stuff, like I mean, I don't know. Like when I think of culture, I think more of like books and songs and like stories and stuff. People being united by various like vibrations of sound and color. And there's obviously like a genetic lineage to those sorts of things. But I don't know. The race realism is just boring.
It's like it's more like I know what you're saying. It's the ideal where, and I've been through this too. And this is why people give me criticism is that I'm all over the place. One moment I'm talking about, Eurasian nationalism and about how it's the eventual outcome where there's going to be this new white Eurasian race. And then all of a sudden I'm talking about Dungeons and Dragons the next time, or I got my new album out. Like, I know you're, because it's like, I've seen this in the past too, is that, and this is something I bring up on Countercurrents as well, is that if you're an artist, right, and I think this goes with the secret agent ideal, if you're an artist and you believe in all like the white nationalist, not even white nationalists, like race realism, human biodiversity paradigm, you can incorporate in your art something like Sam Hyde does, or you could just agree with it, vote in policies like the New Liberal, and then just make original art where liberals can like it too. It's like it's kind of like men liking Robert De Niro, but then Robert De Niro saying he's voting for Hillary Clinton, how he wants to punch Trump in the face. We all know that's ridiculous, but I guess people still like Robert De Niro. It's hard to break a relationship with all of his movies he has done. And
no, he's a really good actor.
Exactly.
Like yeah.
And so why would you just throw him away just because he's, being a puppet for that, this and that, or if he actually sincerely believes that? And exactly, there's like a divide between there. And I feel the same way too with politics, where I when I was making my Asian Aryan website last year, I understood it was ultimately, even though it was transgressive in nature, I kind of understood that was bad in optics because I just didn't want to be the Andrew Anglin of Asian Nazism or some ridiculous,
right.
And it's like, oh, that's all my fame's gonna be. The Andrew Anglin. It's not gonna be my music. It's not gonna be my books. It's just gonna be this corny figure and to exploit it to make money. And some people go that route to try to make money or at least fame, and it's kind of silly. It's like Base Stickman. Remembers Base Stickman, right? The guy who hit an Antifa on the stick in the head during the civic nationalist years, the alt-right voting for Trump. And now it's kind of just, you don't hear much about him that much anymore. And
it's a here today, gone tomorrow sort of thing.
Yeah, and he was just making his fame off of being the guy, the stick guy, right? And even though he didn't like alt-right stuff, it's I don't know. It's a weird thing where it's like, how can you divide you blow up because you're a social media fad, and then you make money off of it, like Grumpy Cat, and
They should write
then
some sci-fi books. If they were
exactly
writing sci-fi books and doing things like that, I mean, they'd be a lot more interesting and like it'd be more fun for people.
longevity, correct? And then people would actually, because once you blow, right? And that's what rappers call it, blow. Once you blow, and people find out, are you boring? Are you this? And then it's like, oh, he's written many books and this and that. It's kind of like how Christian Weston Chandler, when he blew after submitting contests to Sega, when people eventually found him, realized how queer and eccentric he was. And yeah, and now he just does what he does, and whether it's acting, I don't think it's acting. I think it's just him being crazy. That's his whole audience. Is people are giving him money just so he can act a certain way, right? But he's also you can like Christian Wilson Chandler's comics and his weird karaoke sessions and things like that. Yeah, artists are not. I don't know. There's a lot to think about when people just think of the artists should be like maybe to borrow a phrase like Brandon Adamson Rabbit said this where why don't you just go to the library and pick up a random book and do a project on it, right? And pick it up and it means something to you. It doesn't have to be the classics. It doesn't have to be Michel Proust or some James Joyce, because that's already been loved to beaten to a definite stick. It's kind of like what I've been saying is Gene Wolfe, right? Science fiction writer. I think more people should read Gene Wolfe, but nobody cares. So it's like, again, I think people find their own leaders in their own interest. And then
So is
sometimes
Gene Wolfe your leader?
no, actually, that's my older brother likes Gene Wolfe, and he kind of told me about him. And I like science fiction. And at first, he's kind of like Robert E. Howard. He writes like Conan the Barbarian stories. An old science fiction writer. He's 88 years old now, but he wrote a book called The Book of the New Sun, and it's about 900 pages long. About this character named Severian that goes on this like wacky Beowulf science fiction trip, and it tells you about our society millions of years in the future, but also the past, and about like it's from reactionary philosophy to like anti-liberal, and it's like it's full of wisdom. And I just feel like, wow, even though this book has won a lot of Nebula Awards, why isn't he a household name? And it just makes you think, and it's just I don't know, things like that. I'm
How do
saying
you spell his first name?
Wolf, like Wolfe, like he's a wolf. Gene
But his first name, Gene.
Gene, like Gene.
Okay. Like a genetic. Okay.
Like a Gene Wolfe, and Look in the New Sun. It's
He's
just
a
like
Gene Wolfe.
yeah, he's kind of like a science fiction writer. And again, it's people like that are really interesting. And you just the problem is there's not much media about that, and you got to do it on your own to find out about these.
Well, there's something called like there's this guy Ian Crossland, and he came up with this concept called thought mass. And the idea behind thought mass is that if a lot of people are focused on something, that it creates a sort of gravitational pull on the level of human attention. So if you get all sorts of people talking about stuff and thinking about something, it creates, it's like it can cause other people to focus on that too, even if they don't want to, And so the fact that we live in an age of mass media where a lot of people are connected to like the news 24/7, it's not good because it's causing a lot of people to focus on like these political things that they don't have a lot of influence over. And as they're doing that, they're neglecting some of these people, like you're mentioning, like Gene Wolfe, like these sci-fi writers, and like all these like weird ideas and things like that. And so you only have so much time during the day. Like I was reading about I was reading about Quebec, the history of Quebec, and before they had like developed like news, before they had to develop press, like everybody just like had like weird stories they would tell each other, like folk tales and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And but then like once they got the news, people stopped like talking about these like folk stories and folk tales and things. And I really do think that like the news kind of just like makes things like a little bit more boring. Like I'm beginning to think that maybe like the news is like the enemy of like humanity or something like that. Like regardless of who controls it, you know? and then
It,
people should just turn it off and focus on other things.
I know what you're saying, where it's not just news, it's the smartphone. It's because I think about this too. You know, when I was 15 years old, they were talking about like maybe 2007, 2008. Um, there was a time I remembered where everyone had an AOL instant messenger and you had to go
Yeah.
on a desktop computer. And I always thought that was so petty. Like I was thinking, well, why don't you just go up in person and talk to it? I was like, well, I'm traditional. I'm going to talk. I don't need AOL instant messenger. And then all of a sudden, at MySpace came around and that was like posting on your wall. And then you had MySpace and AOL instant messenger, and then Facebook combined it and everyone forgot about MySpace. This is like 2008 and the time of during World of Warcraft and goofy stuff like that. And I just remembered saying, I don't need Facebook. That's just like a high school, and it just got worse because then texting happened around 2011 or something, and I was like 19 years old, and it was like the first time I like texted a phone. I just thought it was so blatantly bizarre, and to this day now, I think that accelerated so fast. Now, even at work, you're like staring at your phone in your own little robot world. And I think maybe the protest should be not even like not the news, just like the phone itself, you know?
Yeah, we do have to be careful, because like once you introduce a new technology into society, if every it's possible for everybody, like the television, almost everybody has a TV now. But before, nobody used to have. Before, people just used to play piano and sing songs as a family, and then they got the TV, and now it's like,
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Like, you know, like when the Simpsons, you know, when the Simpsons opens up, they say the Simpsons run into the garage door, they sit down, they watch the TV as like a joke about the American family or something, you know?
oh, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
George H. Bush Sr. said that, you know, we don't want the American family to be like the Simpsons, right? But the irony is that the Simpsons are like a dumb family, and they all, or maybe Family Guy, you could say a thing. The cliche is they all sit together, they watch TV. But that's interesting to talk about the organic family. They didn't have TV and they lived like the Amish life, maybe at reading a book or at least piano or some organic. I do,
Playing cards. They played cards a lot too.
yeah, like board games or something like that. And I
Yeah.
became associated with that scene just as like not only a form of Luddite, but just like playing board games, reading books without TV or video. I just stay away from video games now, is even because it's again, like you're saying, it's this creation of reality, this alternate reality. But at the same time, video games and TV, cartoons in particular, I really love cartoons, change our perception of how we think about things. If we watched a cartoon reality of 9/11 is more different than actually seeing 9/11 happen. Or cartoon versions of girls change our sexuality more than actually seeing girls.
I like some people criticize the effect that anime has on people's consciousness, but I think it's had an overall net positive effect. I mean, I think anime is definitely better than the news. You know.
Well, yeah, it's becoming weird where I think we're reaching a point of the anime hipster moment where if people are playing Dungeons and Dragons for nerd heritage or culture, for this irony fact, they don't really play Dungeons and Dragons. They just like it as a fashion statement. Now we have this probably group started around the early teens where it was probably early millennial, late Gen X, where they watched all the Cowboy Bebop and Cyberpunk and Akira stuff that came out in the 90s. And now they're into authentic animes like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure or Fist of the North Star or some kind of what was considered normative in Japan in the 80s is now, oh, you're not authentic enough if you don't like this anime. And same with the girl animes. They think, again, I think it's the trickle down multicultural effect, finding authenticity through consumption. But again, this is just like, well, why is it particularly consuming on Asian material than like black stuff? You know, it's very weird. It's a very sweple thing. What's going on? Very materialistic.
Another thing I want to mention about Asians is that you got like the Mongols too. I mean, if people like associate Alpha with being like a savage or something like that, well, like the Mongols, they were like probably the most savage, and I think they ruled Russia for maybe about, I don't know, 300 or 400 years or something, hundreds of years, maybe 800 years it was.
Well, there's still Mongolia, is still a separate country, but I
Yeah.
don't know. They just stay out of international affairs. They are still pretty throat singers and horseback riders, and still over there in China, but they're not. They're their own unit, which I find really interesting.
Yeah, and so I mean, like, and so how is Asian beta if like they have Mongolians who are like who were doing like all the same stuff like Vikings were doing, except for a longer period of time.
Yeah, it's again. I think it has to do with like thinking Asian as in the Asian American, right? It's really popular right now, like to think of yourself like the Asian American. They don't say they're Chinese, they don't say they're Japanese, they don't say they're Korean or Southeast Asian. They say, "Oh, I'm Asian." Like there are
Uh-huh.
literally like silly ditzy Asian girls who like try to act white and they're like, "Oh, I just happen to be Asian." Like you catch it like a drug. You have like centerfold eyes. Oh, that must mean you're Asian. And I think that has a lot to do with the whole ideal of again, this Asian, not Asian Americanism, but again, this Eurasianism that's happening. This weird, it's like a fashion accessory or something
Well,
weird.
well, Eurasian was the original identity of this. Like, and I think you'll always have like I think you'll always have pure Europeans in the United States, but Eurasian was the original identity of the United States.
Like how so?
Because if you look at like the Native Americans who came over here, uh, like looking at like genetic research, they weren't pure. So these like Native Americans who came over here were like Mongolians who mixed a little bit with like white people in like in and around like the Russian area. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
so they migrated from here, but they weren't pure Asian. A lot of them weren't pure Asian like when they got here.
You
So
mean like
like
Native Americans, right?
yeah, a lot of like the Native Americans. I'm not saying all of them, but a good portion of them were just Asian European hybrids basically.
You know, there was I think I said this before on the Lost Heroes stream, but when I was at Temple University doing a class on American dissidents, we were talking. We had a class about the Japanese internment camps in California and how it was unfair. And one Japanese lawyer went over there, and there was this one girl in class, and she said she completely related to the whole situation 100%. And I thought, she must be some kind of, she looks Chinese, maybe Japanese herself. But then, I was believing this, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, she said, "Yeah, it's quite different, but yet I think us as Native Americans and them as Japanese have a different." And then I was thinking to myself, "What? Wait, she's Native American?" And like and like if you do a Google search of Native Americans, this girl, I swear, thought it was just some like Japanese American girl, but you start to realize like, oh, there is this weird Asiatic like mix in here. But then again,
They're Mongolians.
yeah, they're Mongolians or something. But I'm thinking to myself, well, this girl, I'm pretty sure she has a nice white Chad white boyfriend that'll sweep her away, and they'll have their Native American Eurasian kids somewhere. She was that type. I don't think she was the preservative type to find a Native American man. It's like this incident, right, where you might come across that ditzy white girl that goes, "I'm 10% German, I'm 10% Irish, and I'm 5% Native American," and you just don't see it. My cousin's girlfriend, her name was Mary, said this, and I was just like, "You're not Native American. If you were Native American, you would have the centerfold eyes and you would have some dark skin." But again, it's just like there's this kind of mythos revolving around the Native American mystique. And if there are Native Americans left, probably in like Arizona or something like that, they are very Asiatic in some way. I just don't know how related to they are.
Well,
That's
I think they're Mongolia. Like they're closest. They're closely related to the Mongolians, and I suspect the Tibetans as well. Like Larry David, the guy who did the Seinfeld.
yeah.
He's a he's an Eastern European Jewish guy, and he got his DNA tests, and his DNA test came back as part Native American, but his parents from Eastern Europe. And so
Hmm.
the reason for this is because the reason they came back as part Native American is because a lot of the Eastern Europeans are part Mongolian, especially the Russians. Like the Russians are basically, I think a lot of the Russians are about 5% Mongolian or something like that. And
Mm.
so, yeah, and so like, so, but Mongolian will come up as very close to Native American. Although I do like when I look at Mongolians, I do think that like they probably like mixed a lot with the Hans because they have like a little bit more of like a Han face, you know.
I would say the Native Americans and the Hawaiians are like the borderline Asiatic American people. But you get once you see them, like one time my girlfriend said this. She said, "Oh, this guy was trying to hit on me the other day." He said, "You look Hawaiian." And it's like, why would you bring that up? Does she like it that she likes being hit on, that she's Hawaiian or something? I don't know, but certainly there is this the Asian thing, or at least races prior before European settlement is kind of attractive and has this, and yet given a chance, I think, you know, if there was that, like if you're Native American, there is this like weird, like you want to be on the winning side. What I'm saying is, and it's like when given the chance, people want to show their pride in some form or another. And these are kind of some of the arguments I'm hearing from the alt Asian Reddit. The alt Asian Reddit is kind of against the Happa Reddit, which are like self-defeating incels that hate on another, and the alt Asian Reddit's all like, you know, I'm you know Asian American, or I'm you know Eurasian, and I'm proud of it, and I think that's a really good thing too. But I just think most people are just dishonest about it, or at least
It's
they
not about being proud of their Asian heritage.
like that. It's not that. It's more like they use it, like I just said, they use it as a cosmetic, or they use it as I'm trying to find the right words here. It's like they would be on like the Eurasianist side, but they would rather play the white Americana game of being a Thought or a Stacy and a Chad. And I've brought this up again previously, but yeah,
Well, what's the Eurasian side?
I think they like what we're just talking about. Like it's going to be like this kind of ancient. It's not just Asian Aryan in the tale like of the past, but it's also like this futurism that's bound to happen where we get like places like Vancouver, Canada, which is just all Chinese Eurasian runs, or Singapore, right? And it's going to be like this William Gibson neuromancer society that might happen in the future. And
Okay, so you're saying it's like more like you're saying like the Eurasian movement is a little bit more like into like this. I'm not gonna say more intellectual, but more like intellectual in like a futuristic sort of way.
yeah, it's like I'm just putting like the awareness of it, but like most people, again, it goes with the whole Nick Land accelerationism, where it's like people are not aware what's happening. They don't want to be aware. And so if you have like more people naturally going with the Eurasian side, we'll eventually have a society like Vancouver or Singapore or some bizarre like Brazil country, but the president is like far right or some kind of, I don't know. Like
Singapore is like I hear is a very very clean city.
yeah,
Like I like, but like I think some good propaganda for a Eurasianist movement, and I'm not necessarily, I wouldn't call myself a Eurasianist, but I think some good propaganda for it would be that like Eurasian identity is just like America becoming what it originally was, because a lot of these the original Native Americans, they were Eurasian. I mean, because like so, if I think the original Native Americans were Eurasian because like, I think they were Mongolians mixed with Slavs who came in there. I mean, they've done ancient DNA tests on these people, and then they've found European markers in these old, but not like not exclusively European markers, like European markers mixed with Asian markers, and a lot of these very old finds going back thousands of years. So I think these were, I think America was originally Eurasian, I would say.
that is interesting. Yeah, it's this type of. I mean, yeah, that's very interesting. And I'm thinking it more like there's going to. Well, the way I see it is that in history, the East has meat in the West, and the West and East. You know, whether through Martin Heidegger or some kind of full Western continental philosophy that gets its Eastern interest, and then it builds a bridge from there, and then you start to realize that only a marriage between the two groups will create the future psychology man, maybe, or the biology, you know, because psychology is a mix between biology philosophy. It's a mix of those two disciplines together.
Right.
It's kind of like the fascist man, right? That were flirting in the late 1800s. And I think like National Socialism would use the swastika as a Jain symbol, a completely Eastern thing. And so I think the normal progression is like it's going to head that way in some respect. But through the times of like weird multiculturalism and like rampant anti-whiteness, what will happen is this kind of, again, this Eurasian thing, you know, it's going to happen anyway, but it's just people won't bring it up, you know.
I think, yeah, like as far as like the anti-white stuff goes, I think that's probably the foundation of like the alt-right and white nationalism, you know. And so I think there's always going to be sort of like subculture, a pro-white subculture in the United States. But yeah, I think there's, like you said, there's likely going to be a very strong Eurasian movement as well, in addition to white nationalist subculture and other things. Like, I mean, I think we're just I think where we're headed is sort of like a patchwork of subcultures. You know, some people, some prophets of doom, you know, suggest there's going to be some like all-out race war. I mean, I think they're already. I mean, I think that like that's kind of like I don't know about that. There might be, but there's ethnic competition happening constantly, regardless of whether there's like a war declared or not. And so there's already ethnic competition happening, but I don't see it as clear cut as what they're suggesting. It seems like there's a lot of things going on. I think they're going to have their own white nationalists like enclaves in different places, like not like probably not like politically demarcated, but certainly culturally demarcated. And then I think you'll have you know, a lot of like a big strong Eurasian movement too. I think you get a lot of stuff going on in this country, and I think it's just going to develop. And the fact that we do have a decentralized mass media, decentralized media, is making it so that it's allowing us to form into these tribal groups. And so I think the future holds a very complex set of tribal structures, you know?
Like, I think I'm more of doom and gloom, and I kind of believe that what's going to happen is we're going to live in a society where there's going to be like there's going to be cities in the suburbs, and the cities are going to be like these metropolitan Manhattan, New York cities everywhere. And everything's going to be dirt, but all the individuals are going to put on their VR goggles in this Judge Dredd society, and we're going to see our anime lifestyle tuned into that. That's my kind of doom and gloom thing. And if there is any like resistance, you might look at it as Aldous Huxley's, you know, Brave New World, where outside of that world is like a tribe of people struggling, you know, like kind of this maybe anarchist or nomad people, you know, trying to not resist, but they're just left to the curb. I think that might happen in a way.
Well, that's interesting because like over in like, I mean, that's what it reminds me of, like the sort of difference between like Mongolians and like Han. When I think of Han Chinese, I think of like sort of like almost like urban sophisticated people, but then like outside of that you have like people like Tibetans and Mongolians who live in outside the city boundaries in more like a nomadic sort of way, you know. I mean, but yeah, I think like, but yeah, I think you have that, and I also apply that dichotomy to like the West and sort of like the Muslim world too. I think of the Muslims as like the, you know, like the tribes like wandering on the outskirts, and then the West you have like these civilized people. But although I do think that like sometimes people can malign civilized societies as being like inherently pacifistic or inherently uh, obsequious, you know, but I don't think that's necessarily true.
I think it's, well, I think, yeah, I just think these big issues, what's really happening is it's a matter of, I'm kind of going full circle because I think a lot of the critical theorists, or at least some of the postmodern philosophers, really get to the matter of what's really happening in America, and it's consumerism. Yet a lot of them assume from this Gen X or baby boomer position that, oh, well, Marxism is the answer. And I think Marxism is kind of just dead at the moment, and that the left politically is dead because, well, again, I don't even think people who whine and use SJW narratives are considered the left wing. I think they're just normative people who have values which would have been considered leftists years ago, but it's not. And so there is no left wing party because nobody wants a healthy, rational society. It's like, and again, it's like there is no, like, for example, I think the charm and allure of Antifa is not what they say, but the alluring attraction of what you can be, meaning like a punk rocker into hardcore music. It's not about really like living like a Hare Krishna kind of cultist. It's more like liking, it's consumption, right?
I thought they just wanted to like mess stuff up and be able to get away with it.
Yeah, and that's a thrill of it, and that sounds more exciting than believing fascism is bad, right? And I think that, for example, like I just lost the train of thought here, but I was saying, like, if you're just like, if you believe it, our society is set up to consume, right? It's not capitalism is set up to make us free. It's set up that we can just consume, and so all of our realities are based upon other people being exploited within capitalism. So if there's anything I'd like to hear more from white nationalists, but they haven't really said much arguments about it, that I think eventually white nationalism, or that the alt-right sphere, is going to be anti-capitalist in nature, which were the very thing critical theorists were against, whether they were talking about, Deleuze or Althusser or Foucault. They were anti-capitalist in nature, but it's just that they thought Marxism was a thing. So what's going to happen is, I think, want to get more in touch of our issues. It's that we live in a society where people, entertainers, artists, they're merchants, and they need a class of exploited consumers, and those exploited consumers write history. And if the successful consumers are wooed over, they're the ones that write history. And so, people say we need to deconstruct in order to find the real history. But again, it seems to me that white nationalism will only succeed if they become like insane clown posse and everyone's a juggalo and they consume the most records.
I think you have a point there. Yeah, that does sound, that makes sense to me. I mean, like, I want to mention a couple things. The first thing I want to mention is, okay, as far as like preying upon consumers and stuff like that, I just want to mention a law that they had in China a while ago, a couple hundred years ago, that made it so that you only paid your doctor while you were healthy, and then like while you were sick, you didn't pay your doctor. So, I mean, I think that's a pretty good system, to only pay your doctor when you're healthy, and then if you get sick, you don't pay your doctor. I think that's a good way of doing things. But as far as yeah, I do think they could become like juggalos, the white nationalists. I do think they could, and I think that'd be a good idea for them. They would definitely have a good.
I just feel like, again, and this has been said before, that consumers are never in touch with their reality. What consumers believe is they just want to consume. They want to believe in goth culture, so long as they buy the shit to their identity resolves around it. Same could be said about people in the Dungeons and Dragons. They want to buy into it so they can believe and resolve around it. And so I think what's really happening is that people think they're doing something morally right, fighting for truth, but then it becomes like a Pentecostal church where you're throwing money in the basket, but that basket is just for the pastor's living, right? So he doesn't have to go work and be exploited at McDonald's. So the one being exploited is the believer. The believer doesn't understand his own reality. And so it's really hard to have a discourse or dialogue with normal people. Like, if you have the most fervent people saying that they're pro free speech and pro this, and then when something comes along about like someone advocating something really transgressive, they get offended over it. Why? Because it doesn't sell. But then if you have a free speech where you're bashing on SJWs all the time, and you get videos and super chats, well, you're ironically making money by bashing on SJWs. I'm very concerned now about people who say I'm a free speech advocate, because when they finally hear the speech they don't want to hear, they freak out. Or when they hear like quote unquote hate speech, they freak out. They didn't realize what they wanted was something that they would be so fervently against, right? If someone said you suck and here's the reason why, so what do you just say? You suck back? Or actually you just take everyone's advice as wisdom? It's almost as if free speech advocates are for this dainty reality of everyone being an armchair socialist and pretending it's like a Socrates game or some bullshit.
So where was like so? What's your opinion on capitalism?
I think capitalism defines a lot of our life. And you might hear websites like PragerU or Dennis Prager and his posse argue that capitalism is good. Capitalism awards you with freedom. So as long as you work hard, you can be at the top. You can be like Eminem, who made his rap album and now is a millionaire, or from the dirt poor guy and now he's God. He doesn't have to worry because rich get richer, right? Well, again, it's a game, and you only succeed at it if you win at the game. The game requires exploitation of other people, and so you might hear a lot of Gen X, old PhDs, poor, helpless, and demanding people, tell you that socialism is unfair because it treats people wrongly. But I want Marxism. But ironically, that doesn't work, because in some Zizekian reality, what happens is they're the capitalists too, and they're the ones exploiting off their students. And
So do you believe in private property?
I do, but in a way that, it's in this way where we have to argue whether it's like capitalism is set up as this way of it's a must, it's only, there's going to be one reality, it's capitalism. But if you start to understand it, they argue that capitalism set up for freedom, but in actuality, capitalism set up for consumption.
Well, you can have private property without capitalism.
Yeah,
It would just have to be done in a different way. Like I think that I haven't really given much thought to the capitalist question, but private property is important to me because I would just want to be able to shut my door and
yeah,
not have to and not have to pay attention to like any weird propaganda that people are saying. And can just like focus on my own
America
little
was
world.
set up like that. If you look at the amendments, the First Amendment is freedom of speech. You can do whatever you want. You can be whoever you want. And two, the right to bear arms, what it really means is that you get to stop people who are trying to exploit you. And that goes well with private property. So if you're like sitting at your home and someone says, I'm a part of this religion, I want you indoctrinated, I want you to be a part of it, you have the right to bear arms, meaning you can defend yourself against people who are trying to exploit you with their free speech. So free speech isn't really free because you have the Second Amendment to protect your own speech. And finally, if you think of the Fourth Amendment, to right to be privacy, the right to privacy, that goes along too with it's like you can be private, you can just be left the fuck alone, you live in your little not castle or cave like a Confucius monk, and just like it's interesting that America sets the good life like that way. But at the same time, you can really only do these things if you have the money and if you're a winner at the game, because otherwise you're going to be a wage cuck or a slave labor. And most people are tools for the people that are happy living these lives. And so my greatest criticism of capitalism is that the winners of the game happen to be Chads and Stacys, and not the people creating art.
My father did pretty good at capitalism. The way he went about it is he was driving a taxi, and so one of his customers was like making money in real estate, and so he asked the guy, how do you get money for this stuff? Like, how'd you do it? And the guy was just like, oh, well, took out a loan from the bank to get like a two-family or something like that. Then he rented the two-family out to people to pay back the loan. Then he had a two-family that he rented to people. Then he got some more property that way. So he just basically got out a loan. Like, so the guy just got out a loan and rented the places out to people and then paid back the loan with the rent money.
The irony is that people are borrowing loans to go to college too, as to improve their hour investment within work. But people tend to forget that college and higher institutions, therefore, the enrichment of the individual to be an aristocrat and some kind of form of intellectualism. And now you're seeing people, the middle class, graduating out of the dozen for social status and this ideal that they're going to get work, but it doesn't really happen because it's middle class and attitude, kind of what Paul Fussell says, that people are graduating just to be that, and they're not really. And this is why I worry too. There should be more. There should be more masculine people taking the PhD program, because all the PhDs are like women. They're all just like bitchy women who are going to take over this art, this beautiful art that was made like 100 years ago, and they're all just going to throw it away for some cat lady Harry Potter, nicey nice middle class brainwash shit. And so you have to understand that the people who are in control of, like, if you want to call it the SJW liberal narrative, is the transgressive liberal elite. It's this elite class who does have the money because they have no anxieties at all. Like, they don't have to play capitalism because they are inherent from a family that has money. They have trust funds of like millions of dollars, right? Living in NYC or California, and they can go to art school and do what they want. They don't have to worry, and they can make all the art they want, from Piss Christ to My Bed, and make the values and realize normative people can never be like them. And I think it's becoming to a radical extent where it's now anti-white male, where the fat black kid in rural Pennsylvania who draws anime is somehow Da Vinci now. And this has a lot to do with the queer stack and what's considered eccentric arts. My argument has been that, POC people of color, they should be anti-liberal. They should definitely, and call for what they want, right?
Most people of color don't actually buy into
That's right.
the anti-white stuff. I mean, they did like a study on it that showed that most people of color don't buy into it.
In fact, most POC girls just want white boyfriends, which is the irony of it all.
Yeah, I think the thing is that everybody is just really confused because of the way the mainstream media presents things. And so you do have a bunch of white people who've been convinced that what you called POC people are all against them or something like that, which really isn't the case. And a lot of them are just going to the other far extreme just to signal against the sort of anti-white stuff that has been shoved down their throats. And so, I mean, if anybody's concerned about far right, white people or whatever, I think it's really just an equal and opposite reaction to the
irony is that the middle class white people are they believe in anti-whiteness, the middle class white person, and so they propagate it along with a higher class white liberal elite that go along with it because they want to make their lives better. And this is usually a boomer generation, a very older generation. And I think, again, I'm trying to tie this in with capitalism. I think the people who complain about capitalism are the people that are grateful they're not wage cucking, or that they're upset that they can't win at the game of capitalism. So they propose a fair game to beat capitalism, but ironically end up being a capitalist by getting a job as a PhD.
That was like Karl Marx. Karl Marx was jealous. He had some it was either rich brothers or rich cousins or something like that who were very good at capitalism. And he was an academic who didn't really know how to play the game that well. And so
that's sad about it. And so I know the capitalism tries to help special ed people get into the game, but again, what are you attracting? You're attracting Chads and Stacys, and Chads and Stacys don't make fine art. The queer makes fine art. And so I'm starting to believe now that the whole alt-right, the anti-liberal scene, needs to adopt anti-capitalism, because it's going to create a vanguard, right? It's not just about, okay, magically this race of people is going to, because what happens is it's just going to bring Anglo-Saxon capitalism with it. There has to be more than that. There has to be vanguardism. Maybe I'm getting to the ideal of monarchy, or this weird Nick Land alt history.
I like the Roman Empire. I like the idea of uniting everybody under something strong.
Yeah.
And it's people have a strong and under the Roman Empire, people had a strong sense of national identity, but it wasn't like based on like any sort of like racial purity or whatever. I mean, there was different ethnic groups, but they were all like Roman, and that was like their thing. And as far as I know, I don't believe it was capitalist. Like I know during the Roman Empire, like people would just like go to like hot tubs or something during like lunch break, and they didn't really work that long. Like those big like elaborate Roman baths. That's where they would go for their lunch break. And like at the baths, they would like get like a massage, like use the hot tub, then maybe listen to each other, like read poetry or something like that, and then go back to work. And they didn't really work, you know. And so I'd like something like the Roman Empire. I'd like to have something like that, and not like a Richard Spencer type Roman Empire where it's like only white people. I would just like a Roman Empire that's just generally people, you know, just like normal people.
I think it's more. I know what you're saying. It's like I'm just thinking in Spartan or Assyrian. I think it's Assyrian society. The men who would be the warrior class, they would go to brothels like at the end of a 14-day 2 weeks ends, and they would go, they would book a woman, have sex with her. You know, they didn't have condoms back then, so if they had an illegitimate kid, the kid was a bastard. And so in a way, it was kind of this brave new world mentality where you can go to sex anytime by entering this business, where prostitution was completely legal and completely by, you know, controlling sexuality, as there's an entire class of a witch class, right? And for that warrior class, or that there was a society, or the Athenian society, where they were upper class and, like you said, they just read books, or they try to control society, but they it's almost like the class is set up for their nature. And I tend to like that. And this is something Robert Stark brings up too, the aristocracy. Like there needs to be a class just for like artists, right? I always think people like Greg Johnson, all he wants is some homo nationalist kind of society where men are nice to one another. There's a Mannerbund, and, you know, they all care like a family.
You don't need an entire nation for that, like what Greg Johnson wants. I think if Greg Johnson wants like a white nationalist version of what he's going for, he should be more focused on trying to get like a city state. Because if you think about like Athens, like if he's going for like an Athens type thing, that's like a, but like an Athens for like white people, you would need a city state for that. And so he should be like, instead of like being like a white nationalist, he should be a white city statist and be looking to form his city state rather than like a whole nation. That's like a lot, you know. All you need is a city state.
Yeah, or just a town, you know. And
Yeah,
then capitalist,
white townist.
if you have $1 million, you can protect like 6 people or a family, right? And you could say fuck off and whatever that place may be. And I think that's what most normal wealthy bourgeois people do, is they create their own little islands somewhere out in the USA and and that's what they consider, they beat the game like a video game, and they just go from there, you know.
There's also wondering like, okay, so you sort of mentioned like this dichotomy between Chad's slash Stacy's and somebody else. I guess what's the artist, whoever, whatever term he is, I forget what it was. But does that even need to be like? Does that need to be like? Do these two camps need to be in a state of hostility? Because if you look at like Michelangelo, he was most often financed by like these rich philanthropist type people who would, like, a lot of these artists are just financed by really really rich dudes, and that's like what it's always been. And I'm guessing that these like really rich people would be like Chad's and Stacy's.
Yeah, and it's weird because our society loves the nerd so much. There's this nerd culture love. There's this kind of love for the outsider, the goth kid, whatever. The transgressive liberal elite loves this, you know, queer person of color. The POC person is going to get hired in Harvard over the white man. But ironically, we have Dr. Phil McGraw having his own tabloid show, or Donald Trump is our president. And so why is that? And it's just like there's biology versus what humans want to construct it as. So there are, if you look at this, reasons why the queer liberal hates normative people, because it's not just they're successful, but because it's almost unfair. It's a game played by the people who are biologically toned, but they're not artistically toned. And so, again, the society is set up to hate on people who are artistic, and so it's very annoying.
We're using the word society in a very like society is a general term, but you're using this general term, I think, to describe American society, I would say.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure that these like the same sorts of rules that you're talking about would apply in other places.
Oh yeah, I'm talking about American society.
Because I just don't know if the because like I mean I'm not really sure what the rules are outside of America, but I do get the chance that a very different set of rules are in operation. You know, like let's take Russia for instance. I know like in Russia, being like good at chess is like really prestigious. You
Oh
know,
yeah, chess is really hard. I don't blame you. Chess is difficult.
and so a lot of this just has to do with like what's praised in our society. And so if people in society are praising the arts and the artists, all these different people, then naturally like wealth is going to flow to them. Like if you look at like a Renaissance Italy, there's a lot of praise given to like the artists, people who are into that stuff. So as a result, a lot of wealth just naturally flowed to them, and then as a result of that, they sort of became the culture creators, you know. And so the culture creators in your society are determined by who gets the praise, who's praised. And so if we look at American society, it's just generally like I feel like a lot of like college football players get praised a lot. A lot of like people who go to like Iraq or whatever place they're fighting at nowadays, they get praised a lot. I'm not even sure what Middle Eastern country people are fighting in now. And so it's just like people get praised if they go to like the Middle East and get their legs blown off, or they get praised if like they inject themselves with like weird things to like make their muscles like blow out of their bodies and then play football or something like that, you know. And I'm not like I do think it's good for people to be like physically fit and toned and everything, but I just don't agree with like these weird things that they're taking to make their bodies like really, you know. So that's what gets praised, and this is like so. I mean, if things got to change, like I think you just got to present the artist or whoever it is as being cool, as being like masculine, as being masculine too. I mean, I think that's an important part of it. I mean, you don't want to portray the intellectual as being too feminine, you know, like Jean-Paul Sartre, like in France, like a lot of the women liked him.
Yeah, he was a celebrity. He was like a name, you know, that the white culture of the time liked, you know.
Yeah. And so I just it's like if you like wealth and sexual opportunity goes to whoever gets the praise in your society. And so that's basically what determines it, I would say.
Like a weird high school mentality or some like popularity contest, which unfortunately it turns out to be. And I think about that a lot too as well. But we're kind of at the end of the program. It's about an hour in. But thanks, Patrick, for being on. If anybody's interested in finding more about you, where can they get you?
StarWarsIsReal.wordpress.com. StarWarsIsReal.wordpress.com.
Israel.wordpress. That's wait. Dot. I'm trying to write it. Awesome. That's awesome. That's an awesome. Like I think about weird stuff like this too. That's awesome. Star Wars is. You just might as well make like. Just try it and be like www.starwarsisreal.com and just see where it goes.
Yeah, well, it
doesn't have to be official.
Yeah, like on that like blog, I just like have a lot of stuff about my like dreams and stuff. Like I had this one dream recently where in like the dream somebody was explaining to me that like God is just like another word for like the force. When people pray, they're like using the force like for and against each other and stuff. So
interesting. I gotta read into that. But we'll keep in touch. I'm gonna call this show good. I'll talk to you later. All right. Good night,
All right.
Patrick.
Bye. Good night.